So it's official, Blizzard is finally getting rid of combat add-ons. And just in case you don't follow all the news that goes on with World of Warcraft, I got you covered. You see, last month, Ian, who is the senior game director at World of Warcraft, sat down with a couple content creators on a podcast episode where he talked about some of the new stuff that's coming in the next update, as well as his kind of future vision for the game and where it's going. This is where he actually brought up the DPS rotation assistant and then the oh so well-received one-button DPS tool, which basically made everybody kind of ignore everything else that he had to say. I, however, continued listening and liked kind of what I heard. I pretty much enjoyed everything that he was saying after that for the most part. Basically, what he said is that they want to continue making UI improvements to the point that combat add-ons no longer feel necessary and people don't have to go outside the game in order to find those. He even mentioned about, they having their own DPS meter, having their own timers, and that kind of thing. So last week, PC Gamer actually sat down with Ian to go more in depth on this, and he pretty much said, yeah, we are going to get to the point where combat add-ons are no longer allowed in the game. So thank you, Wowhead, for putting together this nice list from the interview. That way we can go through it and see all the key points that he said without having to look through the whole article. We're going to go ahead and cover that. We're going to talk about it, see what he said. And then they also do have a projection. Well, Ian doesn't say that they have a projected date as to when this is all going to take place. I'm going to give you my projection. I'm going to give you some of my personal opinions. I'm going to give you some positives to this, some negatives to this. And yeah. So first, before we jump into the list, we have to preface it by saying that you have to keep in mind, it's hard to imagine these things happening in the current state of WoW because we're so used to the overly complex and mechanically intensive game that we have. With the vast changes that are going to happen and with them implementing their own UI features, the game is going to be in a much different place in the future when this stuff is actually taking place. So you kind of have to have like an open mind and assume that the game is not going to be pretty much resembling what it is now. It is going to be a different, challenging experience. Because if you just take what WoW currently is, add this list, you're like, yo, this is like horrible. This is going to literally kill the game. But, again, a lot of stuff is going to happen with these changes, so we have to keep an open mind. So let's work down the list. The very first one, incoming heals won't be trackable. Me playing as my secondary character is primarily a healer. I play a Resto Shaman. My main is a Death Knight. That's what I primarily play. But anyway, I love healing. This is kind of a pain just at the initial thought of seeing and hearing this. But again, trying to remain like looking into the distant future as to what the game is going to be, I actually don't think this is that big of a deal. Maybe in pugs, it'll be a little bit more of a pain in the ass, but overall, it just means that you have to communicate better. And I think it's going to go back to more of like an older school way of like healing assignments. Because right now, like unless you're pushing like mythic content or I can't say Mythic Plus because Mythic Plus only has one healer, but high-end rating, like you should still have healing assignments, but in like LFR, obviously normal and heroic, you don't really have healing assignments. And I think what this is going to do is just basically revert kind of back to that. So, just to put it really simply, if you're in group 3, you're the healer in group 3, you're responsible for group 3. If you're the healer in group 2, you're responsible for group 2. And that's kind of it. Not a huge big of a deal in my opinion. All right, so let's look at the second change, which says no tracking group abilities or other players' cooldowns. I see how this is kind of also a pain in the ass just with the current state. But again, this kind of goes back to like the first thing of like having more of an open communication thing. So more open communication is going to be needed. Like being somebody who leads pugs regularly, it is kind of nice being able to see people's cooldowns. Like if, has the warrior used Rallying Cry, has the totem used a spirit link yet? That kind of thing. It's nice to be able to see those and see if they're still available or not, because then for callouts, you can use them. So it just kind of relates to more of, we'll see, like obviously they're going to have their own implementation of this, I would assume, or something kind of along the lines of that. If not, it just means that communication is really going to be opened up. And I want to say because I've already looked at this list, I've already read the article and stuff like that. Like, I feel like communication is something that they are really trying to focus on. At least with these changes, it's more so like we want people to communicate in raids and higher end content much more than they're doing now. So that's kind of what it is. A lot of the add-ons that these are targeting kind of eliminate the need for extra communication. And I feel like that's what it's kind of targeted towards bringing back. All right, number 3 is no tracking specialized buffs or debuffs. These should be built into the default UI. I couldn't agree more. That's what the cooldown manager is currently doing for your own personal buffs. They do have debuff tracking currently built into the nameplates that they have. It's just not very... It's there, it works. It's just not the most ideal, if you get what I mean. They just don't have as much customization, obviously, as the third-party add-ons that the default has. So as long as they make improvements for that, I actually think this is fine. I don't see a big deal. I have high hopes for the cooldown manager. I think that with all the feedback they've received, that's going to continue to improve, and it is going to be a very suitable replacement for WeakAuras. All right, so moving on, the same is true for tank swaps. If they're building an encounter that requires taunting at 4 stacks, the game should be better about giving players that information. Now, as somebody who regularly tanks, I actually don't see much of an issue with this. The issue I see with this is more so targeted towards DBM users. So what I mean by that is DBM basically just yells at you to taunt. I use bigwigs, which doesn't tell me when to taunt. It just tells me what stacks people are at. But like, you know, even like if you're learning content, you as a tank, you can go in completely blind in terms of like when to tank swap, because like if I get hit with an attack from a boss, right? And you know, 3/4 of my health goes away. I'm like, whoa, okay, I can't take 2 of those. So now we obviously need to swap. The same thing goes for if they're hitting me with something that's stacking and it's like, okay, he hits me, boom, a little bit, boom, 2 stacks. Okay, it's hitting a little harder, 3, 4, 5, 6. Whoa, that's a little much. Hey, buddy, swap. We need to swap at 6 stacks. Like, you know, 6 is the epitome. You know, maybe we'll go back to 5 stacks and swap at that. I don't see an issue with how it currently is in the game, but at the same time, again, I feel like that is like a true target towards DBM, where the people who are playing as tank literally have no idea what's going on. They're just going through their rotation, and then when DBM's like, taunt now, then they taunt. Like, that's it. So I think that's where the stab is at. I think currently how the system is fine. Not saying it can't be improved, but I'm saying just like overall, you know, it's fine as it is. All right, so stun and other crowd control diminishing returns should also be made more visible. Yep, agreed. PvP add-ons might still tell you what classes you're facing, but won't tell you what cooldowns have been used. I don't PvP. I don't have any plans or desire to, so I have no input here. For those of you that do, I'm assuming that this is not a good thing. So that's probably really negatively received upon you guys, but you know, we don't know what kind of improvements or things they're going to do to the game either. So, you know, what can you really say? Just as a whole blanket statement sounds really bad. All right, moving on. Visual customization of nameplate style and scale will still be allowed, but conditional logic to change the way they look because of a buff or debuff probably won't be. Now, personally, I don't use anything that changes the frame depending on a buff or debuff. I'm pretty aware, so I feel like I don't even need that. I don't know how other people play or what they use. The only thing that I can think of that deals with like conditional logic is like, does that mean that if, for instance, a mob is casting an interruptible spell, that I can't make that bar bigger than the other bars? That way it's easier for me to mouse over and interrupt, because that I feel like is kind of a negative. The nameplate system that they currently have in WoW is just not that good. It's okay, but it only has 2 sizes and the sizes don't change. It can be like, especially in big pools, it's not an issue if you're dealing with only like 4 or 5 mobs. You can definitely use it, but like if you're doing bigger pools in Mythic Plus, or you're in a raid that has a bunch of ads, it just becomes way too cluttered and it's very, very difficult in order to try to interrupt. So that is something that they need to continue working on. And I imagine they'll continue improving nameplate systems, but you know, if we can still have that condition, I'm fine with that, because that's really just the main thing, you know, is being able to tell if something's interruptible or not. It doesn't say, you know, it's not like super in depth. It just primarily talks about like buff and debuffs, which is fine. So that must mean, you know, maybe we can still, you know, have a different color if the attack they're using is a frontal, which at point, you know, I have no issues with. That's, you know, that. If not, they need to do something with that to try to help out. So one of the final notes here is that Auction House, Quest Helpers, Gathering, Roleplay add-ons, these should not be affected. That's a good thing. Thank you. Like, please don't get rid of those. You know, if you've watched my content, I hate combat add-ons with a passion. I'm super glad they're gonna completely remove them. But you know, Auction House add-ons are extremely valuable and extremely useful, especially for just dealing with all the items and stuff that we have. Quest helpers, again, gathering, roleplay, like that stuff is great and I think should not be removed. So major W. And then finally, the last thing that they mentioned here is just Blizzard intends to improve the base UI, cooldown manager, edit mode, and the audio-visual clarity of important mechanics while reducing the number of random swirls that require kicks in turn. And required kicks in turn. This entire statement is a pure win. Obviously, they're going to keep doing that. They've already done that with the cooldown manager where they've made some slight changes to it. I feel like they're going to continue making improvements to it. So good on them. And yeah, visual clarity. They did a major thing with that with the undermine, you know, with the blue and red circles, much easier to see. Some of the stuff is still a little bit harder to see, but you know, if they're going to keep working towards that visual clarity, major wins, major wins. The last note is they say that it is not coming in patches 1.7 or 11.2. That's pretty obvious. It's kind of early for them to just be like, yeah, we're completely removing add-ons when we have no idea what they're doing, you know, and they didn't give a projected date, but I'll give you a projected date. I actually think this is going to kick off with the launch of Midnight. So if we look at the roadmap, right, here's where we currently are, or we're getting ready to be. We're actually in 1.5. 1.7 is coming out. This is where they have the new content and the new system update right here, right? So the new system that's coming out is the rotation and DPS tool. That comes out in 1.7. 0.2 comes out, season 3. Season 3 is the last season of The War Within. They are not doing a season 4. So as soon as season 3 is over, we jump into Midnight. They don't mention anything here about system updates. I imagine they'll still do something. But if you go to 2.5 here, system updates. This is where I imagine they're going to implement a brand new tool that's going to eliminate some of the other add-ons, whether it's a DPS meter or timers, or just overall UI improvements for other stuff. 2.7, again, system updates. My opinion is, well, just say, okay, so season 3 kicks off in June, and if it goes about the original cadence, which is like just over 20 weeks for a season to the next expansion, we're looking at like 24-ish weeks, 23-ish weeks before season 3 ends and Midnight launches. That puts Midnight's launch right around the end of January, start of February. I really think that the Midnight team, because they've already been developing this for a while, are truly working on a lot of these things. So like a DPS meter, their own timers, their own cooldown manager, that kind of thing. And then they're just going to slowly release those to the public for more testing in these next 2 major updates. So yeah, I actually foresee third-party combat add-ons not being allowed in Midnight, like at all. And if it makes it into Midnight, it for sure will not be in the last one, like at all. But I'm predicting Midnight, your third-party add-ons are going to be gone. All right, so we're going to go over some of the final stuff here. We're just going to cover some quick positives, some quick negatives, and I'll give you my overall opinion. Just right out the gate, if you've watched my content before, you already know I hate combat add-ons. I think they are just a horrible thing for the game. You know, they're designing the game to combat all of the add-ons that are going on. It makes the game overly complex. I'm all for the complete removal to I hate to use the term simplify because people immediately think, oh, you just want a dumbed down game, when that's not the case. Like a game can be simple, but challenging. That's what I'm hoping that they go for, is that the game is still challenging, very challenging, but it's just not like you're not dealing with 30 different mechanics in a boss. Like that's kind of like the main thing. And then like with Mythic Plus, where you have, 8 different mobs that are pulled and each one has like a certain spell that you have to worry about keeping track of with your defenses. And you have to make sure that you're rotating your kicks and interrupts. It's overly complicated. It can be simplified a little bit more. And that's what I hope that'll happen with this. So that kind of led into like the very first positive, is that I think it kind of levels the playing field just of the game in general, like across everything. It just levels it out. The game is no longer overly complicated. Therefore, the game itself is not like overly difficult because, let's be real, Mythic Raiders are very far and few between the rest of the population. The same with those who are pushing keys of like 15. You guys are just the top 1%. It seems like most of the time Blizzard kind of accommodates that top 1% when that's not the vast majority of the player base. And probably going to get some flack for saying that statement, but it is true. Like a lot of the player base does not enter mythic rating. They don't push over 10 keys, you know, and I'm not saying that you guys should be, that percentage should be penalized, but it's just this whole, like, you're using the tools that you have, right? And Blizzard knows that you have access to these tools, so they have to push to try to stay in front of it. It's just a very bad tug of war game. So having like a cap on it and just having a base UI, it doesn't remove like that top 1%. The top 1% is still going to be the top 1%. They're just going to be achieving it in a different way. It's, you know, that's what it basically boils down to. So I think another positive of this is it actually encourages players to understand the actual mechanics of the game. And, you know, some of you might be like, well, you know, I don't want to have to memorize all 30 abilities that a boss has. And I agree with you. But again, we have to remain open-minded that in the future, bosses aren't going to have 30 different mechanics all popping off at the same time. It's going to be a much simpler design, you know, challenge still there, simpler design. I keep having to like reiterate that because I feel like people just kind of jump on that. And it's like, you're dumbing down the game. You're dumbing down the game. Like that's just, you got to try to stay away from that mindset. You can have a simply design, a design that's simple, but that is still very challenging. One of the only games that comes to my mind is like Path of Exile 2. It's very simple. Bosses have like, you know, 3 or 4 different main mechanics. You just have to, you memorize the patterns, you avoid them. If you don't, and if you don't know them, then you're heavily penalized by pretty much almost dying or dying. So that's, you know, different game. I understand, but it's still there. It's a simpler design, but it's still extremely challenging. Just a couple minor positives here. I think that it will be easier on people's systems, you know, because basically add-ons, they utilize resources on your computer. This is really minor, but some add-ons people use, they can make a small tweak, and then all of a sudden it's eating a bunch of their memory. So it just kind of reinforces the stability of the game overall and makes it a smoother experience for the user. Not everybody's going to really agree with that and be like, oh, that's just a bullshit thing. Get a better potato of a computer. But, you know, it is a minor thing. It should be mentioned. So why not, right? And then finally, like the last positive I would say about this is that it does make the entry into World of Warcraft a lot better for brand new players. Brand new players are very quickly overwhelmed with the amount of content that's in World of Warcraft. And rightfully so. It's a game that's been out for 20 years. There's a lot of content there. Having a just standard like combat experience for everybody means that brand new players will be able to level and then get into the end game a lot easier, a lot smoother, and be able to learn and pick up on those systems just because it's going to be kind of standardized. So obviously we covered some of the positives. Let's talk about the major negative, which is very obvious. The growing pains of this are going to be massive. We are so used, and like, I'm not saying like I'm exempt from this, right? Like I wholeheartedly like rely on Luxthos for my WeakAuras setup. It is perfect. It is tailored to all my classes. I, you know, never have to look at my keybinds. All my keybinds are minimized down on the bottom. I just have this nice cooldown manager where it has all my abilities. I can see what's available, what's not available, and it's just so clean. I will very greatly miss it especially if like the customization is not there for the cooldown manager that Blizzard is implementing. So massive growing pains for people who are going to have to adapt to not being able to use those and to the system overall. All right. So one of the other major negatives is less accessibility. A lot of players in terms of accessibility features, rely on these third-party combat add-ons, you know, to play the game. So whether they're visually or audibly impaired, maybe they have less finger movements. So some of these add-ons are major accessibility features, and it does let, you know, a wider audience play the game. I do think that Blizzard has to really make that a focal point of their add-ons and user interface, which I imagine they will, but it's just something that I want to point out because, you know, personally, I think that is a really big deal. And then finally, the last negative I would say is just, you know, the risk of these features and Blizzard add-ons being unpolished. I mean, let's be real, you know, Blizzard takes time to receive feedback and then to implement those changes. It's not something that happens quickly. Whereas a third-party add-on, you know, they're independent creators. These guys, they get a bunch of feedback. Hey, This feature, massively broken. Okay. You know, less than a week, they have a turnaround, bug fix, things like that. You know, we're not going to necessarily have that with Blizzard, so it's something just to kind of keep in mind. All right, so there you have it. That's basically everything there. Just some of my personal opinion on this is, again, super excited. I'm super positive for this. This is a huge win, a huge step in the right direction for World of Warcraft, and is better for the long run of this game. I can't be more excited about it. Good stuff. Let me know what your guys' comments are down below. What are your thoughts? Do you think it's a good idea? Again, reminding you, just remain open-minded that the game is not going to be in this complex state that it currently is in the future when this stuff finally takes over. You know, it's going to be a much different game. So you got to kind of keep that in your mind as you're going through this. Again, super positive, super excited. Good stuff. Let me know what are you guys' thoughts down below. Thank you guys for watching. If you're new to the channel, subscribe. I do stuff like this for WoW. I also do guides covering all the raids, Mythic Plus dungeons, I offer cheat sheets, all that kind of stuff. Thank you to the channel members. Shout out to you guys that support the channel. Love, respect you guys. Also have a website that I put out just for easier access for downloading, and that's going to have a lot of changes and stuff being added to it in the near future as well. I'll see you in the next one.